Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us in today's webinar on the GlobalG.A.P Produce Safety Rule add-on for FSMA. My name is Amy Wayne. I'm the Internet Marketing Specialist for PJRFSI, and I'm here to facilitate the session. PJRFSI is very excited to be able to work with the GlobalG.A.P North American technical expert, Rebecca Anderson, today to learn a little bit more about how GlobalG.A.P is aiming to support and verify the FSMA implementation efforts of producers both within the United States and those outside of the country anticipating, exporting products into the U.S. Just as a quick note before I hand the reins over to Rebecca, all of the attendees in the live session today are muted just to preserve audio quality on the broadcast. The presentation slides will be available for download from the PJRFSI website for attendees to review afterwards. This webinar is also being recorded, and the recording will be made available for review on the PJRFSI YouTube channel, so go ahead and check that out if you'd like. We do want to encourage any questions, so please type them into the question tab of the GoToWebinar sidebar, just so that Rebecca can read and address them later in the webinar. So now, without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and let Rebecca introduce herself, and we'll get started. Thank you again for attending, and I hope you all enjoy the session.
Thank you, Amy, for the introduction, and thank you to Perry Johnson, registrars, for hosting this webinar in collaboration with GlobalG.A.P. Again, my name is Rebecca Anderson. I'm the Technical Key Account Manager for GlobalG.A.P North America. My job is to be responsible for the implementation of the GlobalG.A.P standards in North America, including Canada and Mexico, and basically that means working with producers and certification bodies on determining how to best interpret the standards or ways to implement practical solutions for any of the control points, as well as building the standards, so working with a group of stakeholders to develop this produce safety rule add-on, as well as our new produce handling or packing house standards, so development of new standards as well. I've been with GlobalG.A.P for a little less than 2 years at this point, but my experience with auditing starts with certification starting in 2011 as an auditor, moving up into a scheme manager, and then making my way to GlobalG.A.P. So I have worked as an inspector and have been on over 500 farms across the US and in some international countries as well. Prior to that, I was working in agricultural production, in tree fruit production, both organic and conventional, as well as experience in dairy management and greenhouse management, sometimes just a little bit of a jack of all trades. So for any producers, I've definitely been in your position as well when the inspector comes on site. So hopefully the idea is to take what we have here and make sure that it's understood by all parties on how to implement it. So with that, this is our Food Safety Modernization Act Produce Safety Rule add-on. During this webinar, I'll be doing a little bit of GlobalG.A.P overview. So what is GlobalG.A.P, how the GlobalG.A.P Integrated Farm Assurance addresses the produce safety rule, and a little bit about the rules in order to start using the add-on, as well as the CPCC. CPCC means control points and compliance criteria. Basically, that just means the question and responses for the add-on. So GlobalG.A.P is a global organization, like the title suggests. We have one objective, and that's to provide safe, sustainable agricultural worldwide. What that means is that we have voluntary standards for certification of ag products around the globe. So we become the body that works with suppliers and buyers to meet in the middle in order to provide certification standards that makes everyone, I wouldn't say happy, but at least satisfied with something that's practical, but something that provides a level of assurance about the products. Our organization is a voluntary organization of members, so that includes producer members, associate members, and retailer members as well. We, of course, have more producer members than we do have the others. We also have a GlobalG.A.P board, which is made up of 8 persons, 4 from the buyer community and 4 from the producer community. So anything that we do and put out into the market is something that's been approved by that board, which means that it's been vetted by the producers and the retailers. So you can have an assurance that it will be acceptable and it has been made sure it makes sense. We have more than 190,000 certified producers in over 124 countries. Most of those producers are in what we call our option 2 or group option. So it would be more like a co-op of producers that get together and become certified. So it makes it a little bit easier. Most of our producers are smallholder farms. So that's something that I think is a little less known in the US market, that we do actually work really well for small farms. Not to say that the large agribusinesses are excluded, I'm just saying that it is possible. And then we have 3 main products with our standards. So we have a local GAP, a global GAP, and a global GAP add-on. So right now we're looking at this add-on piece. So GlobalG.A.P would be our main standards. Our main standards include our IFA, which is our main food safety standard with also pieces of environmental and social aspects in order to satisfy some customer requirements. Then we have 2 other main standards, one being the harmonized produce safety standard, which we use typically here in North America, which is a United Fresh driven standard where we collaborate with USDA and other stakeholders to provide a food safety only standard that is GFSI benchmarked. So that's another product that we have in the US market. And then the last thing going through public consultation right now is our produce handling assurance standard. So those are our main 3 products right now. We also offer local GAP, which is a stepping stone to the global GAP IFA standard, and would be for usually smaller producers or first-time producers that aren't quite ready to reach that GFSI level. So there's a program specialized for that. And then we have our add-on program. So this would be one of those. We also have GRASP, which is a social responsibility, FSA, which is another sustainability add-on. So things like that to make it more customized for whatever is needed. We also cover more than 400 products available for certification. So we're not just in fruits and vegetables, which is our main discussion today, but we also cover flowers, ornamentals, aquaculture, cattle production, poultry, combinable crops, things like soybeans, etc. So we cover a wide range of agricultural commodities. Our structure is something like this, the GlobalG.A.P Secretariat being our headquarters that basically coordinates everything. Of course, everything is approved by our board and goes through technical committees. These are members. These are persons that are just like the producers being certified, who are nominated and or apply to be on these technical committees. So these people are responsible for the development and or next versions of standards. So it really comes down to the people that do participate, not GlobalG.A.P as a company trying to push standards on people. These come from the farmers themselves that go through the standards. We have other different types of committees. Important one for like Perry Johnson, for example, our member certification bodies can participate in certification body committees, which help form the general rules and provide tools for auditors. For example, we have a new inspection methodology guideline, which guides auditors on how they should conduct and interpret the audit. Also helpful for producers. If you need access, let me know. But those types of tools are developed by these certification body committees. So these are all member-driven tools that move the standards forward. The last thing I want to mention is our National Technical Working Group. This is open to any person in the US. They do not have to be a member to participate, but this group meets once a year and they develop what's called the National Interpretation Guideline. So they take the standards and look at it through the lens of country legislation. So for example, here we would be most impacted by FSMA or by USDA or FDA. But as well as if we're looking at the social aspects and the environmental aspects, we're looking at OSHA, for example, as well as the EPA. So how does the EPA interpret some of our standards? So we write that in, and it helps guide auditors. And if you are in the US and you're already complying with the legislation, then you're already complying with the control points. So that's a tool that's developed by this group, and that is open for membership. For non-members. We have more than 145 accredited certification bodies, so Perry Johnson being one of them, with more than 1,700 trained inspectors and auditors. It does say over 900 agricultural products, so the 400 was more of the crop side. Each one of our auditors has to go through formal education and training, so having some sort of background or degree in agriculture, making sure they have working experience, production agriculture. In order to audit a farmer, you have to have been a farmer somehow. So it just makes sense so that the inspector can be in the shoes of the producer. As well as we have different training requirements and online training, etc., and consistent calibration between our auditors and inspectors. So the people coming out to the farm need to be not only professional, but they need to have some sort of experience in agriculture before they can come to the farm. This is our sort of structure of the way that the standards work. So you probably have noticed, if you've been audited before, there's 3 different modules for the fruits and vegetables. So you go through the all farm, then the crop space, and then the fruits and vegetables. So you can see that all of the farmers have to at least adhere to these all farm based questions, which includes like the worker hygiene and health and safety and some of the environmental aspects. And then we come over into crop space, where we talk about fertilizers and pesticides. And then we move on to fruits and vegetables, which is more specific towards harvest hygiene, things like that. So if you were also doing something like combinable crops, where it would be soybeans, for example, you would still have to answer the same questions about worker health and safety and hygiene and fertilizers and pesticides, but you're also focusing on more machine harvesting rather than elevated risk harvesting. So that way all the farms are treated a little bit more equally. And then the same thing would be true down here. So even if you are getting a dairy certification, you're also considering environmental concerns, worker health and safety, et cetera, et cetera. So the add-on for today's presentation is only applicable to this fruits and vegetables section, which I'll mention a little bit later as well. So you couldn't add on to combinable crops, for example, and you wouldn't need to because it's not applicable to those types of crops. So the fruits and vegetables standard has 99 control points on food safety. So when we're talking about the produce safety rule, we're just adding to this food safety section. And GlobalG.A.P is built on what we call risk assessments. So a lot of the produce safety rule, if you were to do the risk assessment correctly, and most farmers, do or over time have developed strong risk assessments, they would include elements of the produce safety rule. However, because they are not word for word, verbatim, the produce safety rule or what's said by FDA wording, we did have to go in and add some specifications to make it more clear. The other parts of the standards include this worker health and safety and this environment and biodiversity. And of course, there are questions on traceability, which go above and beyond the produce safety rule. So our checklist is available to individual producers, and it's also available to producer groups. So that would be the same for FSMA, which I'll go through as well a little bit later. So the producers have to do a self-assessment, and then annually they have an external inspection. Most of you are probably familiar with that already. With the option 2, the group is the certificate holder. The group is responsible for the internal inspections of all the producer members and maintaining a quality management system. Then the external audit is of this quality management system and an external audit of a sample of the individual farms. So the farmers spend more time with their internal staff rather than the certification body. And depending on the size of the group, this can save tremendous amounts time as well as save costs for the individual farmers instead of paying for certification body audits. On the certification body side, they have more time to work with other clients as well and provide a better service for some of these producer groups. So again, most of our clients are smallholders. Maybe not true in the US so far, but hopefully that will change as we move forward. So there are two options, option 1 and option 2. So with that and all that background information, moving into the actual FSMA PSR add-on, so that's what we call it, the FSMA Produce Safety Rule add-on, or FSMA PSR add-on. So the Food Safety Modernization Act was signed into law in 2011. We know that FDA is charged with that implementation process. No matter what current political process happens between FDA and USDA, probably it still will be charged by the USDA, by the FDA so far, but some of that is subject to change in the future, but that's what it is right now. The produce safety rule, with FSMA, there are 7 different rules that were signed into law. The ones that impact GlobalG.A.P or our producers are the Produce Safety Rule and the Foreign Supplier Verification Program. So the Produce Safety Rule is the standards for production and harvesting of fruits and vegetables. So compliance had started January of 2018. We know that the implementation enforcement is not going to happen until January 2019. If you are being audited right now or investigated by FDA, I'm told that those are just training exercises for producers and for the investigators by FDA. Depending on the size of your farm, and by size of farm I mean average 3-year revenue, producers may not have an implementation date until 2020 or 2021. So small farms and very small farms have different compliance dates. And of course there are agricultural water points which are still being determined and discussed on how those are going to be handled. With that, because the water is so in flux right now, we have made our agricultural water points in the add-on recommendations instead of major or minor must, just like the normal IFA checklist. So as recommendations, producers are not scored and they do not count against the conformance certificate. So when FDA makes a decision about agricultural water or the compliance dates come into act, if you will, then we will make them major musts like the rest of the checklist. But we're going to wait to see what FDA does on that. So the other aspect that we cover is the Foreign Supplier Verification Program. And by cover, I mean that we're most impacted by, because we are in 124 different countries. And we have a lot of certificates that are being used worldwide for importers that are coming into the US. So all of those persons need to be under some sort of foreign supplier verification program. And what happens is that those foreign suppliers are able to use the GlobalG.A.P IFA checklist or inspection audit and certificate and this FSMA add-on in order to have the verification activity part of the foreign supplier verification program checked. So an importer will still have to conduct a hazard analysis, create a supplier evaluation policy, and implement that policy, but the IFA checklist and add-on together can be something that is their accepted evidence of supplier approval. Hopefully that makes sense. So that could be true with any third-party certification, I would imagine. So all of the other food safety standards have created their own sort of FSMA add-on. So you can talk about Primus, or you can talk about BRC or SQF. They all have some sort of FSMA add-on. And the reason that they're add-ons and not included directly into the standard is because some of the requirements are specific to US legislation, for example, training and other things that we'll get into later. But if you're a producer in Peru and you're only shipping to Europe, it wouldn't make sense to have to go through additional compliance points for USA legislation if you're not even shipping to USA. So because of that, us and the other standards decided that we need to keep separate add-ons for help with the Foreign Supplier Verification Program and the Produce Safety Rule. So that compliance date, I believe, is that today? I believe that starts today for Foreign Supplier Verification Program. We already know that the importers and retailers here have gone through investigations with the FDA for the FSVP, where they spend a couple of hours in office picking a product or two and picking a few suppliers within that product and following the traceability and importer verification activities. So that's exciting that that's starting already. With that, we have approached FDA, and FDA has not yet recognized private schemes. That includes us or SQF or Primus or BRC. But all of us as standards, we sit under an umbrella called GFSI, or Global Food Safety Initiative. And FDA and GFSI are in discussions and have been for the last 2 years on how they can be practically recognized. Right now, this is not a priority of FDA as we come into implementation dates, but the one thing that FDA has said is that the United Fresh Harmonized Standard is aligned with the Produce Safety Rule requirements. So if you were to do the HPSS standard that is GFSI recognized, then you would be in compliance, or at least at a minimum implementing the requirements for the Produce Safety Rule. So that's one way you can get to it, but the idea behind this FSMA Produce Safety Rule add-on is just to make sure that producers are implementing the correct standards. So we created this add-on to just cover anything in the Produce Safety Rule not already covered in the GlobalG.A.P IFA standard. This add-on can be used by any fruit and vegetable producer in the USA, and as it's being used for the FSVP, it can be used by producers outside of the United States who are importing into the US. So the idea is to use the add-on to aid producers to identify any requirements that need to be addressed at the farm level for FSMA implementation. So again, we're not a regulatory agency, it is voluntary standards, so we can't guarantee FSMA compliance, but we can show you what is in there and what you may or may not be missing. So one of the challenges with, not challenges, let's say, one of the things that we wanted to be able to provide with this FSMA PSR add-on is helping producers show their implementation efforts towards FSMA to retailers. So one way that we are able to do that is to use our existing GlobalG.A.P database and create a market group called FSMA Observers that can have access to the audit reports, nonconformity summaries, and corrective actions reports in the GlobalG.A.P database. So right now, as a producer, the producers, each producer that's certified or that registers gets a GlobalG.A.P number. You're able to use the GlobalG.A.P database to track that GlobalG.A.P number and where that producer is in the certification cycle, whether they're certified or just accepted or suspended, etc. Well, now, the producers will also have this additional section which would be called FSMA, and retailers or anyone in the public can see whether or not they're FSMA certified or not. But then if there's a FSMA observer and the producer gives access to the FSMA observer, then the FSMA observer is able to see the audit reports, nonconformity summaries, and corrective actions. This is a new avenue for GlobalG.A.P to explore. We've not typically ever provided or required audit reports to be posted. They're always given strictly to the producer, and then the producer has the opportunity to do whatever they want. But now we are requiring the certification bodies to upload the audit reports and nonconformity summaries. This is not new for the food safety industry. All of the other standards are already doing that. We've just recognize that with FSMA and with retailer need and with the importer needs, that this is something that just makes sense. So it is a little bit of extra work on the certification bodies though. So how did it work? So first of all, you know, we knew this was coming down the line since 2011. We developed a guidance and self-assessment, which was released in December 2016. That was a 72-page document that was pretty hard for producers and auditors alike to understand. So finally, after the produce safety rule went into effect, we decided to develop this add-on and got approval to do that in fall of 2017. We created a focus group, which was of producers, certification bodies, importers, and retailers to see what this add-on should look like. So we had one-on-one meetings and group calls with them for about 3 months. At that point, we developed the add-on, put it out for public comment between February and March of 2018, and we had publication of the final documents in April of 2018. So right now we're on version 1.0. As we move forward with audits and get feedback, we change and revise the add-on as necessary. At this point, we've been doing online training and webinars since April of 2018. We started with the certification bodies, then to our farm assurers, which are approved consultants for GlobalG.A.P, and then we moved on to our national technical working groups, and now we're able to work with certification bodies like Perry Johnson to reach out to their audience members in terms of producers and other participants in order to offer you training. So it's been a quick process, as you can tell, in order to get this document out into the public and into use. So in terms of the actual differences of the produce safety rule compared to GlobalG.A.P, some major things to understand is that in GlobalG.A.P we use this term legal entity, and produce safety rule uses operation under one management. But for the purposes of this add-on, whoever is the certificate holder is the person who will be assessed for the produce safety rule add-on. Then there is primary versus secondary activities farm. So here, harvest crews would be technically considered primary producers since they're the ones at the farm level. And then secondary activities farms being like packing houses, or storage facilities, or any other type of further handling of the product, which could also be included in the produce safety rule add-on, right? So it's included in the scope of the certification, so therefore it's included in the scope of the produce safety rule add-on. Then there is this idea of off-farm packing or storage. So for some reason, FCA has a very loose definition of what is a farm. And because of that, some of the off-farm packing or storage facilities, even though it's the producer's product going through that packing facility or storage facility, some of them may be under the preventive controls rule because of ownership or because of the percentage of product that's going through that facility. Because of that, when the facility is covered under the preventive controls rule, it cannot be covered under this produce safety rule add-on, right? Because there are different requirements in the preventive controls that we have not covered, either in GlobalG.A.P or in this produce safety rule add-on. So that's something to be very careful of, both as a producer and as a certification body. In the US, we are familiar with this term raw agricultural commodities, or RACs. And for the purpose of GlobalG.A.P, we just call that the fruit and vegetable product. All of the products that we certify are on our official GlobalG.A.P product list. Again, there's over 900 products if you add all of the livestock and things like that. Most anything that's covered under FSMA is already on the product list, but if you have something unique as a producer, for example, we recently added finger limes, which is a newer product to the US, but not on our product list. It is going to be under FSMA, so we made steps to add that to our product list. So anything, can be added with those justifications and research, but it does have to be on there. There are exemptions, and we'll go over that in a different slide. And then there's this term foreign production. So because we are in 124 different countries, we don't use the term foreign, but in the purposes of the produce safety rule, foreign would be anything outside of the US. Other key differences in terms of terminology, GlobalG.A.P uses the term covered to mean produce that it's grown beneath a structure. So this would be in a greenhouse or macro tunnels, something where people actually can physically walk under or walk through. When we're talking about the produce safety rule, covered means products that are included or must be produce safety rule covered, like they have to comply with the produce safety rule. So sometimes we'll use the term covered crop, and here we're just focusing on this idea that these products are the ones that are not exempt from the produce safety rule. So when we're talking about GlobalG.A.P certification, you can certify multiple commodities when in the scope as long as that they're on the product list. The only thing we explicitly do not cover is sprouts at this point, and we have no exemptions based upon size, value, or for the processed products. So for example, I think that wine grapes are exempt, I believe, or what else is exempt? Potatoes are exempt, for example. So all of those are commodities that are included in GlobalG.A.P. However, there are specific exemptions. And all of those documents would need to be kept on file by the producer. So for produce safety rule, they're talking about the harvestable or harvested part of the crop. That's the same with GlobalG.A.P. Products originating from plants designated for fresh, cooked, or processed consumption by humans, and or there's a different rule for animal food, for example. So all of that would be the same, but again, we do not have any exemptions. So when you get this presentation, you can see that some of these are hyperlinks. So this will link you directly to the exemptions page. This will link you to the products page. This will link you to our product list, et cetera, et cetera. So this will link you to our definitions. So make sure when you get a copy of this presentation that you go through and look at those links. So exemptions. Other key differences that we noticed were in personnel. So as we go through the actual produce safety rule, there's different requirements in the produce safety rule in terms of hygiene training, soil amendments, ag water, fertilizers, harvesting, etc. And most of that, again, was already covered by our IFA standard, but these are some of the things that were different. So in GlobalG.A.P IFA, all persons on the farm have to receive hygiene training appropriate to their job responsibilities. So this includes personal hygiene and food safety, so hand washing, making sure to remove PPE before going into the bathroom, using tissues and then washing your hands, etc. So personal hygiene, not wearing jewelry, all of that's the same for the produce safety rule. The one thing that is different and above and beyond, and what we have to call out with the produce safety rule, is that one supervisor receives training at least equivalent to standardized FSMA curriculum recognized as adequate by the FDA. So right now, you may or may not know, that's the Produce Safety Alliance rule, Produce Safety Alliance grower training. So if the producer takes that class or takes a train the trainer class, or somebody that they know or hired takes the trainer class and provides that training with the exact same curriculum, that would also be the same exact thing. So the challenge is to provide this training internationally. It's only available in English and Spanish right now, but of course we have producers like in all over the world. So we're trying to figure out how to translate this in order to allow persons to import and meet the compliance criteria of the produce safety rule for this training. Perry Johnson may have their own Produce Safety Alliance sort of training or topics, but I'll let Amy answer those questions about what they're doing for the produce safety rule. So just making sure that the supervisor has this training and that they're designated as the responsible person for food safety hygiene implementation. The next key differences are agricultural water, including the definition, the sampling, and the indicator organism. So we talk about water in terms of pre-harvest water, so irrigation water, pesticide application water, etc. Water used at harvest, so cooling or hydrocooling, or in the case of cranberries or watercress or something like that, using water to harvest. And then post-harvest water, so this would be our dump tanks and flumes as we handle the product after it's been harvested, and then of course hand wash water. In terms of FSMA produce safety rule, we talk about ag water as the reasonably likely to contact the harvestable portion of the crop. So this would mean that in some cases irrigation water is not actually ag water. So consider if you have tree fruit, so if you have apples, for example, and you're using drip irrigation or micro fans or something like that, it's not likely to ever contact the product unless you have low-hanging skirts. So technically, irrigation water would not be included. However, once that apple orchard has, say, overhead cooling for the apples when they have to harvest in 110-degree heat in California or something like this, then it would be considered under this ag water definitions and have to meet that requirement. Other ag water includes drinking water, water used on food contact surfaces, so for cleaning and things like that, and any facility water. So any post-harvest handling water does have its own specific requirements. In GlobalG.A.P, our sampling requirements are based upon the risk assessment that the producer develops, and we have an annex that has minimum sampling frequencies, and depending on the water source, the crop, and the irrigation method, we have minimum sampling frequencies of either 3, 1, or 0. An example of 0 would be something like potatoes, where they're usually cooked before eaten. Maybe they have overhead sprinklers. I think the cooked before eaten is the main justification for this no testing. Most farmers are going to test anyways, I would imagine. But anyways, the point being that the risk determines the frequency, versus in produce safety rule, there's a specific sampling program based upon ag water source type. So it's either groundwater or surface water, and it dictates the amount of samples that need to be taken. The same is true for indicator organism, where GlobalG.A.P IFA is a little less specific. It gives some examples, but it allows more flexibility depending on the water source or the risks in that location. We also accept E. coli as an indicator to fecal contamination, but at a minimum, the producers need to comply with local legislation or WHO limits. So now that producers need to comply with local legislation, it really does depend on whether they are exempt or not from the produce safety rule. In terms of the produce safety rule, we're looking at generic E. coli as a standard indicator. And then for any post-harvest water, drinking water, food contact services, there needs to be no detectable generic E. coli. So it's a little more prescriptive than we have set in IFA. In terms of testing, we look at the labs, making sure that the labs are accredited against 17025 or equivalent. In the US, we also accept NELAP, or depending on certain states that do their own testing, lab quality auditing might accept an ELAP or something like that. For the produce safety rule, there are specific lab methods that are listed out. So at first it was 1603. Now there's a list of 9 other lab methods that can be tested. They're looking at specific metrics, so geometric mean or the statistical threshold value. I can't remember STV right now, but there are specific requirements. So again, these quality metrics may be reviewed, as well as the sampling program being reviewed as well. And then testing. Testing again was based on this risk assessment, but the produce safety rule also says that municipal water does not need testing as long as those reports are available. So that would still need to be included in the risk assessment for someone going through GlobalG.A.P IFA. So those are kind of the differences on water as a 5,000 foot, or how do you say 30,000 foot level. the compliance criteria goes into more detail. In terms of soil amendments, there are some specific composting requirements that the produce safety rule requires. GlobalG.A.P IFA does cover raw manure, it does cover compost, and all of that is based upon risk assessment. There are some specifications in terms of raw manure of how far in advance prior to planting that the raw manure must be applied. However, when you look at the produce safety rule, there's not an official statement, but they wouldn't currently accept the National Organic Program. I don't know what's going to happen with this National Organic Program or the USDA Organic, so that is subject to change as well. So even so, in general, the good rule of thumb is crops not in contact with soil would be 90 days, and crops with contact in soil would be 120 days. So you can see that GlobalG.A.P is a little more strict on this. So if you were following the GlobalG.A.P guidelines, you would be already in compliance. The compost is a different story. So again, sorry for going backwards. Specific requirements there, which I think are pretty industry standard from what we've heard. The other thing is being able to provide those turning records and temperature records in order to prove that that's exactly what happened. So that would be working with your compost supplier to make sure that they provide that. And then in terms of microbial standards, it would be, again, based upon a risk assessment, but here the produce safety rule is a little more specific. So there's specific criteria for Listeria monocytogenes, for Salmonella, and for E. coli 0157H7. So in terms of the add-on, so those were just the key differences. I want to talk a little bit about the documents, a little bit about the process, certification body, registration fees, and certificate of conformance. So again, making sure that it's understood that a producer needs to already have the IFA either certificate in hand or be registered, accepted for IFA in order to conduct the add-on. And it would be only applicable for fruits and vegetables. So here is a link to the produce safety rule, just to let you know. In terms of documents, so certification bodies that have applied and are approved to conduct the add-on sign a certification license agreement with us, GlobalG.A.P, in order to use the add-on, and then that would also be reflected and updated in any producer license agreement. Then there's the checklist, the compliance criteria, the rules, and the regulations. For the add-ons, any add-on that we use, they are based upon our current general regulations, and then we have additional rules to those add-ons. There's a framework for that, and then we just customize it depending on the add-on, but they're all based on the current general regulations. So anything that you're currently doing for IFA in terms of corrective actions or things that you have to do to register would be the exact same for the produce safety add-on. If you haven't done it before, all of these documents are available on globalgap.org. You go to this link, it's called the Document Center, and you can type in FSMA, FSMA, or PSR and find the documents that you need there. So right now the documents are available in English and in Spanish, and then more languages as we get requests to do those. So again, this is available to any option 1 or option 2 IFA producer that already has a GlobalG.A.P certificate. They must use an approved certification body. So the certification body applies to GlobalG.A.P. They show that the auditor has gone through a Produce Safety Alliance type of training, and then there's an application fee, etc. And then we sign a contract with the CB for this add-on. Then the auditors have to go through training, and I'll walk through that in just a second. The producer would complete a self-assessment the same way that they complete the IFA fruits and vegetables self-assessment, so they do that together. The audit itself needs to be done in combination with the IFA audit, so it would be done at the same time. Any producers that had the checklist, had their audit or certificate issued January 1 through April 30th can have a desk audit or a remote audit for the FSMA Produce Safety Rule add-on. But as of now and moving forward, producers need to have the add-on done at the same time. The duration for the add-on depends on the complexity, the area, the number of participants depending on the size of a group, but we've given a general guideline of 1 hour. The checklist itself for FSMA is about 30 questions, 8 of those which are the ag water. So right now those would just be recommendations. Some of them, of course, compost, and the rest of them are pretty easy questions to check, of which the inspectors hopefully will be checking them throughout the duration and not at the end of the audit. So it should go together as one, and hopefully that reduces the amount of time. So hopefully it's just 1 hour additional for the producers and the certification bodies. In terms of unannounced inspections, those would be conducted in the same exact manner if a producer is supposed to have an unannounced inspection and they are registered for the FSMA Produce Safety Rule add-on, the add-on will also be inspected. Same thing for certification bodies in terms of their audits for CIPRO, those would be also included in the add-on. In terms of accreditation, the FSMA add-on is not an accredited add-on. None of the add-ons are generally accredited, so it would not be included in the scope with their accreditation body audit. If they chose to have the accreditation body look at it, that would be on their own will. So a certification body needs to have at least 1 inspector and 1 auditor per certification body that's approved to do the FSMA add-on and have taken the online exam and completed the online training. So we have an online webinar for the inspectors and auditors and an online exam. So at least 1 and 1. So 1 person to do the inspection and 1 to approve the reports. So that's pretty typical of a certification body, having 2 persons, 1 to do the audits and 1 to do the reviews and approvals. So that would be the same. And then the certification bodies are responsible for supervision and maintenance of the auditor inspector competence according to the requirements. So we check the first 2, and then it's up to the CBs to have a training plan for the rest. And then we follow up with our CIPRO inspections in order to make sure that the certification bodies have followed through with their training. Or in real time, we might ask for approval to see the approvals if something were to happen. So each inspector must have participated in this Produce Safety Alliance class with an approved instructor. So this means that they can have their own on-site approved instructor, so a trainer of trainer, and then they can provide in-house training as long as the same training contents or curriculum is used. So the same requirements for the producer. The inspectors all have had to do an online training and have passed the exams prior to coming out to the farm. Right now, we don't allow farm assurers to be inspectors. This is a change for us. So a lot of times in other countries, when they're doing an option 2 producer group, they have a farm assurer that is doing the inspections. But right now, because of the way that that program is tracked, we're not allowing them to do that. In terms of the checklist, GlobalG.A.P, IFA, you're probably familiar with major musts, minor musts, and recommendations. This add-on is only major musts and recommendations, where the ag water sampling are recommendations and they are not scored. So the producer must have had passed 100% of the major musts that are applicable in order to achieve